Hello, welcome to ZIM Capture. I'm inventor Dan Zen, and ZIM at zimjs.com is an open source framework to make interactive media on the HTML canvas using JavaScript and Create.js. In this capture, we'll take a look at how to make a container. And what we do is we put objects in the container, and then we can control that all at once. So we can move the container and all those objects would move. We can fade in the container and all those objects would fade in. So that's pretty cool. Let's take a look at a code container. All right, we come on in here and we say new zim.container. There, that's a container. And we can pass in a width and a height, but we'll find that as we add objects, the bounds of the container will stretch to match those objects. So we should set that to a variable. So var panel, why don't we make a panel, is equal to a new Zim container, and we'll add that to the stage. Stage.add child panel, like so. Now that would be empty. It would be at 0, 0 up in the top left corner. We wouldn't see anything. So let's add a backing to the container. So var backing is equal to a new zim.rectangle. And we can give that rectangle a size like 600 by 200. And a color, number sign 888 or something. Okay, now we need to add that backing to the panel. So we say panel.add child backing. Cool, huh? So that will add our backing to the container. Now let's see, just so we can see this a little bit better, we'll move it down and over. So we'll say panel.x is equal to 200 and panel.y is equal to 100. There we go. Let's take a look in a browser. Ooh, nice. Okay, so there is a panel on the stage. It's got a backing. Now let's just take a look at that panel a bit more closely. We will say panel.outline, like so. We save that and refresh here. So there's our panel. The bounding box of the panel has now moved to include the pane, or sorry, the rectangle, the backing. And there's its 0, 0 point right there. So when we put the panel in, it gets put at 0, 0. And, or sorry, when we put the backing in the panel, it gets put at 0, 0. And here's the registration point, and that's been moved to 200 and 100. Let's now add, how about a dial? Okay. We'll leave the outline in just for now. It might show us something of interest. So we will say var dial is equal to a new zim.dial. And we can customize this, for instance, color, frame.green. That's the property stored on the frame called green, and that gives us a Zim green color. And we can add this to the panel. Add child dial. Okay, now what's going to happen, come here, what's going to happen is the dial, it has a registration point in the center, so the dial will be added here, and these things will be the same, but this bounding box will expand to include the dial. So we refresh here. Now the bounding box has expanded to include the dial. All right, let's move the dial over. Now we just have to be a bit careful. At this point, if we were to move the dial, say we wanted to center it, and we said, hey, let's center the dial, watch what happens. We've added the dial. If we say something like dial.x is equal to panel dot width divided by 2. And dial dot y is equal to panel height divided by 2. What do you think would happen? I'll refresh in here. I won't refresh quite yet. There is the dial, and we're wanting to move that to the center. But when we say move to the panel's width divided by 2, that currently is this wide. So divided by 2 is going to be off, and same with the height. So let's refresh this. Okay, and we're looking at this and going, what is going on? That's not the center. That didn't center it. What's happening? That's because when we centered it, the width was bigger. It was out here, and the height was out there. So just watch that. It would certainly be easy enough to do. We could take this and cut it and put it afterwards. We could say, hey, set the X and Y positions to the current panel's width and height. That would be with only the rectangle. And then add child afterwards. And we refresh here. And now it centers it. That would be one way that we could do that. The other way, if we wanted to add it here, add the panel first. Instead of saying panels.width, we could say backings.width. Okay, just to be safe, save that and refresh here. And it's the same. So this time we're saying, hey, make this go to the backings width divided by 2. Now note, we did this a little bit quickly. How about we just change these to some numbers? How about like 100 and 100. Okay, so 100, 100. Refresh. Okay, so now within the panel, within our container, we have coordinate systems. This is 100 over and 100 down, and there's where it's put the dial. 100, 100. Okay, so each container, the things within it, its X and Y start right there on that little cross. That's 0, 0. So no longer is it 0, 0 of the stage here, but rather it has its own coordinate system. And by the way, that coordinate system, if you scale it, so let's just scale the pane here. Pane dot scale 0.5, for instance, 0.5, and take a look at what it does. Oops. Pane dot scale. Do I have a pane? I don't have a pane. I've got a panel. Panel dot scale. Refresh. So now the panel is smaller, but look, 100 is really only 50 on this coordinate system here. That would be 100 over here. But within the panel itself, within the container, the scale of the container doesn't matter. Within, this is still 100. Okay, and that's a good thing. So now, as you see, the whole container scales together so that we can make something grow big, grow small. Let's try scaling it to be big. How about 2? You see, and it all now that would be 200 by 200 on the outside coordinates, but within the pane it's still 100, 100. It's just been scaled up. Okay, so let's not do the scale. Now another way to position that dial in the center, and as a matter of fact to center it, which I wouldn't mind doing, is to, instead of doing all this stuff here, we can just say dial dot center on the pane. What do I keep on calling it? A panel. Or what do I keep calling it? A pane? Panel. I do have a pane object, a pane class, which is like a pop-up window in a sense called a pane. And so it looks sort of like what I'm making, and that's probably why. So dial.center on the panel, and we'll save that and refresh. So there it is, the dial centered on the panel, and I mean that's probably the easiest way to get it centered there. Now we might also want to center the panel. So here is the panel. Let's center the panel on the whole stage. So here's where we've added it. Now, if we were to go, oh yeah, well that's easy. That's just panel.center on the stage, sort of like what we did just a second ago. We comment that out. It's going to, well, and we obviously don't want those either. So we center the panel on the stage, and let's take a look. Refresh. Well, that's kind of odd. This panel is not very well centered. Its registration point is because when we did the center, the ZIM center there, the backing had not been put in place. So if you take a look, all we have is a panel, an empty panel, and we just centered that on the stage. So there it is. When it was empty, that's where it is, and it centered it right on the stage, that center. Then we added the backing, and it goes off over this way. So what we probably wanted to do is just take this and do that later. Bring it down here. Yeah, sure. Okay, so later, after we've added all of this stuff, now really at the moment it's only the backing that's going to make a difference. But after we add all that stuff, that's when we would want to center it. And sure enough, now it centers it fine. Once we add this stuff so it knows how big it is, then we can center it and it will center it just fine. Because center does not just center the registration point, it takes into account it centers the bounding box here. Okay, and note that that will center even if it is scaled, etc. So that's good. So we've centered the dial in the panel. We've centered the panel on the stage. We've seen things inside the container and how they're moving together. Shall we animate them in? Let's take a look. Okay, so we've got them centered on the stage. Let's get rid of the outline. We don't need that anymore. And we can say panel dot alpha equals 0. And as you see, isn't this is kind of cool, because watch this. All that panel was there and now it's gone. Just with 1 alpha equals 0, we can't see the panel anymore. And indeed, that's what it would do with add child, remove child as well. So we could just remove child when we don't want to see the panel. Yay. And that would be how we handle pages. We make 10 pages, put them all in a container, each in a container. And then the ones we want to see, or the one we want to see, we just add it. The other ones we don't add. And then when we don't want to see that one, we remove it and we add another one, add child another one. And that allows us to see different things on the page here. Okay, so alpha equals 0, but let's animate this in. Panel dot animate and alpha colon to 1. So we'll bring the alpha up to 1 in 1 second. Semicolon. Panel.animate. The alpha is the property, and if we wanted to animate more properties, we could put commas in there. And we're bringing that up in one second. So we refresh this, refresh. Ooh, nice. Okay. All right, next. We can drag things. Now, when we drag things, it's really cool. I just want to add one more thing to the panel. Just var label is equal to a new ZIM dot label, and we will put that to be volume. Imagine that our panel's for a volume thing, and then we can say panel. You remember how to do this? Panel dot add child label. Can do it. There we go. That puts it up in the top left corner. We'll move that over a bit. Panel.x. Oops. Label.x is equal to what? 50. And the label doesn't really matter. .y is equal to 100. And we could center that label and then move it over a bit. That would probably be the best way to do it. But there it is. There's a label. We've added it to the panel. And now when we refresh here, we have a volume message. And let's just pause this animation here. Okay. So refresh there. A volume. Now, dragging. We don't really want to drag anything here. As a matter of fact, the only thing we might want to drag is the whole panel. But the neat thing about a container is that if you say the container.drag, then whatever inside the container is pressed on, that's what drags. And that can be just so handy. Imagine we have 100 monsters. What we can do is just say, hey, monsters.drag with one line, monsters.drag, and then we can pick up any monster and drag it around. We're going to see more events that can be, well, drag uses an event, but we'll see more events like clicks and things like that, where we can do the same type of thing, but we'll take a look at that in Capture About Events. So there are excellent efficiencies that we can have with containers. Let's try that drag though. So that looks like panel.drag round brackets. So now by default, drag will allow you to drag anything in the container. Let's take a look. So this isn't quite what we want, I'm sure. Are you ready? We pick up the volume, we drag the volume. We pick up the backing, and we drag the backing. We pick up the volume again, and note that what it's doing is it's taking the last thing that was selected and bringing it up to the top. Okay, so that's how a drag on the container works. Now it's kind of funny, it goes right through to this component, and this component is a container with things in it. So when we drag this, I just dragged this center component part. Isn't that crazy? I'm not sure if I can get those ticks or not. So that's probably not what we would want in this case. Okay, but in many cases, that is what we want, where we specifically enjoy having that efficiency, where like we've got a bunch of submarines and we want to drag the submarines around to place them in battleship. We can just say submarines.drag, and then any one of those we can drag. So let's see what we can do about that. One thing that we can do is we can say current target :false. Now, you would never guess that that's how we would make it drag the whole thing, the whole container. Unfortunately, that's not my fault. That's HTML, well, it's coding fault of JavaScript and other, like Flash used it as well, and I'm not sure where it came from. But how it goes is this. Whatever you pressed on, that's called the target. The thing that the event is placed on, that for some reason is called the current target. Whatever, they just decided that. So whatever the event is placed on, that's the container in this case, panel. Current target, that's what that is. So if we say, oh, not current target false, current target equals true. So if we say current target true, it will drag the whole target there. So let's save that and refresh here. And now it drags the whole thing. Okay, now there's some issues there because it drags the whole thing, as you can see, but look, I can't even operate my component now because it's just picking up that whole thing. So the way you would properly drag a panel that has things on it that they themselves need to, we need to drag them or interact with them, is that we would just drag the backing and then we would put the whole container to the position of that backing. Okay, now there is a ZIM bits that shows you that. Let's head on over there. So I go into ZIM, I choose bits. I can open up drag right here, drag, A, B, C, D, drag. And I'm going to go backwards because I think it was one of the later ones that I went ZIM fourth methods. Here it is right here. So there's 14 different drags and it's number 12 of those 14. And it looks like that. So let's check it out. You see how we've got a panel? The panel is operating. Whee! But I can pick up that corner and drag the whole panel at the same time. So we could have made it so I could pick up the backing and drag it using the same technique as I did the corner, but I sort of like the corner in this case. So that's how you drag it around. This is now how you animate it. So you can view the code of that if you want to see how to avoid this issue where, oh, now I'm dragging this whole thing, but I can't operate what's inside. All right. So to summarize, We made a container. We can move around that container. We can put things in the container by using the add child. We can also center things in the container. We can center the container. We can put more than one thing in the container. Here we have many. We can scale the container and things inside scale. The container itself has its own coordinate system. You can put as many containers inside of containers that you want. And when it comes to certain efficiencies, we could just put one drag on a container and then we'd be able to drag everything inside. And we're going to see some more efficiencies when we turn to the events. If we don't want to drag everything inside, then we can set the current target to true, which means it will drag whatever that event was placed on, which is the whole panel, for instance, or the whole bunch of monsters. Wow, that was a good one, huh? ZIM capture on containers, and you'll see containers a lot in the future. I'm inventor Dan Zen. We're here at ZIMJS.com. Have a great day.